welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Millie and I'm the person behind Blink Lettering. Today I have a very requested video which I've actually had people ask me about a lot over the past few years, and to be honest I wasn't really sure if I wanted to do it, and that's purely because it is a really big part of my business. So if you didn't know, I sell foiled prints and cards in my Etsy shop. It's currently going under a little bit of a revamp, so there aren't as many foiled prints and cards in there as there used to be, but it is still an essential part of my business. And to create these foil products, it took a lot of time and energy and money to get to a point where I'm really happy with my prints. And as a small business, I'm obviously quite protective over how I go about creating my products because it is something I've worked so hard at. However, I remember when I first started diving into toner reactive foil and I was trying to look for lots of resources, I just remember feeling really frustrated that all of the instructions were super vague. It was just like, print your design, put some foil on it, pass it through a machine, done, look how beautiful it is. And I do that, and my foil prints just weren't coming out as beautifully done as the ones I was seeing on blog posts or YouTube channels. And it just frustrated me so much. And I can imagine that there's a lot of people out there in the same situation. So I have decided to do this video, but there's going to be a couple of caveats that go with it. I am going to go into a small amount of detail with how I actually set up my designs. I won't go too much into how I actually do my designs, so I will be using Procreate and Illustrator for this video. However, you might be using different software. I'm not going to go too much into how to use those bits of software. That's something I'll save for another video. But I do go into a little bit of detail about how I actually prepare my files for print, which is something that is super important when it comes to foiling. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about paper, because again, that's important. The printer is important, and your foils and your foil machine is also super important. Now, I'm going to share with you all of my little secrets that I've learned along the way, but I'm not saying that how I have my setup is the perfect way to foil, and I highly recommend that you go away and you practice and have a play and see what works best for you and the type of foil print that you want to create. Sorry about all that rambling, but I'm going to be showing you how to create a foil print like this. Look how pretty that is. So yeah, this is a foil print. And if you have no idea about anything about toner reactive foil, I'll just backtrack a little bit. So toner reactive foil is a foil that basically reacts with toner, hence the name. So traditional foiling uses a plate that has your design on the plate, and that plate is heated up and pressed really hard onto a piece of card with foil in between. And what that does is it fuses the foil to the card where it's being pushed onto with the plate design. Now that requires quite a lot of fancy equipment and quite a lot of big equipment too, and a lot of experience. The bonus with toner reactive foil is it doesn't require too much fancy equipment. So what you will need for this video is a laser printer, a foil machine or some sort of laminator, some super smooth card, ideally a coated card like a silk coated card, Mink transfer folders or sheets of paper to hold your foil and your paper together, and of course your toner reactive foils. Now there's quite a lot of different foils out there, so when you do get your hands on some foils, make sure they're called toner reactive foils and not heat reactive. You want to make sure that they will react with the toner. And basically the process is you print off your design using a laser printer. It has to be a laser printer and not an inkjet. So an inkjet printer uses a variety of inks, and these inks actually sink into your paper, whereas a laser printer uses toner, and these are particles of plastic basically, and these melt and then sit on top of your paper. Now, because they're particles of plastic, what happens when they get heated up later on is they melt and become a little bit sticky. So how toner reactive foil works is you lay it on top of your print that you've printed out, and when you pass it through something like a laminator or a mink foil machine, the heat will make the toner melt, and then the pressure will force the foil to stick to where the toner is. So when it comes out of the machine and you peel the foil off, the foil will stick to where the toner is. That's essentially how toner reactive foil works. And in this video, I'm going to show you from start to end my process for making a print like this. Like I said, I am going to show you a little bit of like the design side, but I'm not going to go too much detail into that. I just mainly want to show you how you can actually foil your own designs. So let's dive in and I'll show you how this process works. So first I'm going to design my print. I'm going to be using my iPad for this, and I'm going to be using Procreate. I'm not going to go too much into what I'm doing or how I'm creating this, as that will be a different video, but I just wanted to show you the steps from beginning to end. So I'm just going to jump in and design my print now. So I'm pretty happy with this print now. For those of you who are interested, I'm using A4 canvas for this design, and the brush that I'm using is Under Calligraphy, and it is the script brush, which just comes standard with Procreate. Next up, I'm going to take this design onto my computer so I can vectorize it. So I've got my laptop here, and I'm just going to send my design to my laptop so I can vectorize this design. So I'm just going to click on Share, PSD, and then AirDrop and MacBook Pro. So it's going to pop up over here, and it's opened up as a Photoshop file. Now I want to get this into Illustrator, so I'm just going to remove the background, or hide the background, select over my design and copy. Just going to create a new Illustrator document, which I'm going to set at A4, create, and then I'm going to paste it in here. Now at the moment this is still an image, so all designs in Procreate are created using pixels, whereas I want to turn this into a vector. Now you don't have to do this step. I personally find that by vectorizing all of my artwork, it just makes it a lot crisper and clearer. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how I'm going to do this. Again, I'll save that for another video. I just wanted to show you from beginning to end how I start with a design and then how I foil it. But when we get to the foiling stage, I'm going to give you lots of in-depth detail on how I'm foiling. So I'm just going to go ahead and vectorize this now, and we'll chat again when this is done. Okay, so I've got my design here. I'm pretty happy with how it looks. Before I go ahead and PDF this though, I just want to change this black. So at the moment it is 100% black, so that's just your basic black. Now I found with doing foiling that turning it into a rich black really helps. And a rich black is basically where you add some magenta, cyan and yellow into the black. Although I'm using a mono laser printer, I've just found that turning it into a rich black means that more toner is added onto the paper when it prints. So to do that, first I'm just going to click here, and at the moment it's at grayscale. I'm just going to change it to CMYK. And now when I open this, I can change this to 60, 40, 40. Now this is a pretty bog standard rich black. There are a few different varieties of rich black, but this is just the one that I tend to use for all of my designs.
Hello, editing Millie right here, hence the slight change in look and different weight t-shirt. I just realised when I was editing this footage that I missed out a really vital point that I'm sure a lot of you guys will ask about, so I just wanted to pop that in now. So I'm talking about changing the design from black to a rich black. And some of you might be asking, well, can I put a colour through instead of black? And the answer is no. You want it to be as black as possible. You don't want it to be grey or any sort of colour because the foil won't stick as much. If you're using a mono printer anyway, then you won't be able to print in colour. But I just thought I'd mention that if you are trying to print in colour and then foil on top, then it's not going to work as well. If you do want to have a bit of colour printing and foil on the same artwork, then you'll need to print the colour using an inkjet printer, and you print the design for the foiling on a laser. Let's get back to the video with filming Millie.
So now I've converted this to a rich black, I'm going to go ahead and save it as a PDF. So I'm just going to save it in my downloads for quick and ease of use. And up here I'm going to select the PDF/X-1A:2001. I just find using this setting the best for when I'm printing my prints, but totally have experiment and see what works best for you and your printer. So I'm just going to click save and OK. And then I'm just going to open up my PDF. So I've got my PDF open here and I'm going to hit print. So I've got my Brother printer selected, which is my laser printer. And I've got the page set up to A4 as that's the size I want to print it. And then I'm just going to go to this button down here, click printer and open this up. Now these are the settings that I tend to use for my printer and for the software I'm using. You may find that accessing these settings are a little bit different as well. When it comes to foiling, it's all about just experimenting and figuring out what works best for you and your setup. So I'm just going to click on print settings, and for my printer I just need to tell it that I'm printing on thicker paper. This just means it passes the paper through the printer at a slower speed. I've got it at a resolution of 600 dpi just to say that I want it as best quality as possible. And my paper source is manual. That's because for my specific printer it has a manual feed where it passes the paper through the printer completely flat and doesn't curve it. So for me to be able to do that, I have to manually feed the paper into the printer. Now there's a couple of settings here that I'm just going to have a little chat through with you. So firstly we've got toner save mode, and I want to make sure that's unticked. You might have something slightly different in terms of wording, but basically we want to make sure there's as much toner going on the paper as possible. Next, I've got the graphics quality as graphics rather than text, as again, this will make sure that there's enough toner going on the paper and it will include all the detail as well. The next thing on my settings is improve print output. And the thing I like to select here is improve toner fixing. Again, it's all about making sure that there's much toner on the paper as possible. So when the foil is passed through the ink machine, the foil will stick to the toner. So I've got improve toner fixing tick there. And then the last setting that is really important and something that pretty much all printers will have, it might just be worded differently. So have a good dig around and see if you can find this. But this is the density adjustment. So this is how much toner is going onto your paper when you print. And you want this number as high as possible because you want as much toner going onto the paper as possible. So that's all the settings I have when I'm printing my foil prints. So now I'm just going to click print and print again. And I'll take you over to my printer and we can see what happens next. So as I said already, I'm using the Brother HL L2340DW. Now I've had this printer for a few years, so there's probably better printers out there by now. But the most important thing to have when you're choosing your printer is make sure it's a mono printer. I think basically the black toner used in a mono printer reacts very differently to black in a colour laser printer, and that's why mono printers tend to be better. So this printer has a manual feed, so I can load in card, and I load it in at this end and then it comes up this end, and that means when I have card going through it doesn't bend or curl at any point. So I've got my card now, and this is my silk coated card, and I'm just going to pass it through the machine and print. So now I've printed out my design, the next stage is to cut out some foil that's at the similar size, and then we're going to pass it through the Minc foil machine. So I store all of my foils in this drawer here. Look at all the pretty colours. Now it's important to try and keep your foils away from dust. If your foils get dusty at all, especially the underside, which is this bit here, then it's likely that the foil won't stick as well to the toner. Most of the foils I have here are Minc foils. So the packaging looks a little bit like this. It just says Minc on the front, and then this one is a teal colour, so it's teal reactive foil. And this is the larger roll. They also come in rolls that are about half size as well. I tend to always get the larger ones just because I do larger prints, like A4 size. I got a lot of colours here. I also have some foils from Foil Co, which is a bit more of a professional grade of foil. And then my copper ones are from Patsy May. I couldn't find a copper one by Minc Foil, so I used some Patsy May ones, and actually they work really nicely too. So today I'm going to use some of this hot pink Minc foil, but as you can see there's so many different colours out there. As well as keeping all of my foils in here, I also keep these plastic sheets. These are basically Minc foil transfer sheets. So they are created for Minc foils, but you can use them for any foils. And basically it's a sheet of plastic that you can put your paper in between. So this works well at holding your foil and your paper together when it passes through the Minc machine. So I've got my print, I've got my foil, and I've got a pair of scissors. I really recommend getting a really good quality pair of scissors for when you're cutting your foil. I have used some cheaper scissors in the past and it just hasn't cut through the foil as smoothly. So let's take our roll of foil. Now you'll see on one side we've got the colour, and then on the other side it's got the silver. If you're using silver foil, make sure that you're putting the right side down. Now when I cut my foil down, I like to lay it colour side down, just because it's preventing any dust sticking to this part of the foil that might be on this sheet. So I'm just going to lay it over the design, and I just want to make sure that it's cut as closely to the size of the design as possible. We don't want too much extra foil. If you ever have any little bits like this, just make sure you roll them up and then that doesn't get dusty. And I'm going to put this back in the drawer. Okay, so we can see that pretty much covers my design. So I'm going to turn it over and face it flat down. Actually, I just thought I'd show you. Can you see on this bit of foil here? It looks like it's gone a little bit see-through. So that's where some of the foil has scraped off. And if we were to place this part of the foil directly on our text, then that means that there's not going to be foil stuck to that part of the text. So if you do have any bits of foil that have been scraped off like that, just make sure it's sitting away from the design. So you don't always have to use these foil transfer sheets. I've seen some people who just pass their card and foil straight through their machine like this, and that seems to work for them. Some people may tape a little bit of tape up here and down here, which seems to work, and other people will place a thin piece of paper on top and then pass it through. Now, I used to use a thin piece of paper on top and pass it through the machine, but I felt like that didn't work as well for me. However, since then, I've changed a lot of aspects to do with my foiling, so potentially it will work better now. However, the methods that I have found and researched and worked for me.
Drinking warm water before bed improves eyesight almost overnight. Apparently, thousands of people are already doing this every night as they sleep by adding one unusual ingredient.
Are working really well, so I'm a bit scared about changing any of these methods. So I'm just going to put this in the middle of the foil transfer sheet, like so. And then I just want to lay it down and really flatten down the foil, just to make sure there aren't really any creases. Okay, now it's time to foil. The machine I'm using is the Minc foil machine, and this is the 12-inch size. I have, again, tried things like laminators in the past, and they did work all right, but they weren't getting the perfect effect that I was looking for. But if you do have a laminator at home, then give it a go and see if it works for you. Foiling is all about experimenting and figuring out what works best with the equipment that you have. So the reason I like to use a Minc foil machine over a laminator is laminators tend to have 2 pressure points where they put the pressure down and pass the sheet through the paper, whereas the Minc has 4 pressure points, which just makes the pressure a lot more even as the paper passes through. It also has 6 settings, so that's really great for if you're doing foiling on thinner paper or thicker card. So the first setting is basically just pressure, there's no heat at all, and that will just pass the paper through without heating it up. The next step is slightly warm, and then it goes all the way up to 5, which is much hotter. Now, some people might think, well, why not just put it on 5 all the time and then it's always going to work? I find, however, if you use 5 for thinner pieces of paper, then that tends to wrinkle the paper or damage it in some way just because it is too hot. So it's all about finding the right number that works for the materials that you're using. For me personally, I find that number 3 works best for the card that I'm using, but I do sometimes use a number 4. So let's turn it on, and I'm just going to press this button to get to number 3. Now at the moment that setting is flashing red, and we want to make sure that that is green before passing any card or foil through the machine. When it's green, we know that it's at the right temperature for this setting. I tend to leave it for about 5-10 minutes just because I know that's totally warmed up. So I'm just going to leave this for about 5-10 minutes and then come back and we'll start foiling. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes since I turned this on, and we can now see that the light is green. Now all we need to do is pass this through the Minc foil machine. What I will say quickly is if you are using these foil transfer sheets, you'll notice that at one end it is sealed and then at the other end it's open. You want to make sure the sealed end is going in first, and also we want to just make sure that's where the print and the foil is as well. So I'm just going to pop it in this end, and then I'm just going to hold it just so it's being positioned in the right place. But as you can see, it's just automatically being fed through the machine. Now when you get to this point, don't try and pull it out because that will damage the machine. Just let it roll all the way out for you. It'll get to a point where it becomes loose and you can take it out of the machine. Like so. Okay, let's put this machine to the side and we can see what the foil print looks like. So So just looking at in the folder, I can see that there is a bit of an outline where it has the design. So I can see that's where the foil has stuck to. So it seems to have worked nicely so far. Let's open it up and have a little look. I like to just make sure the folder comes off first and then I peel the foil off. So I'm just going to put the folder to the side. Now, you don't need to let this cool down. You can do it straight away, or you could do it in 10 minutes time. There's no right or wrong for when you peel the foil off. So I just thought I'd mention that. There's also no right or wrong time on how quickly you need to foil the sheet after you've printed it. It's best to do it as quick as possible though, because you want to make sure that there's the least amount of dust on your card as possible, because any dust flecks will mean that the foil won't stick as easily. Now let's do my favourite bit, a foil reveal. Oh yes, that's worked lovely. So we can see that there are some black dots on the print. So can you see here, there's some black dots here and here. But in general, the print is beautifully shiny. Now, I'm not entirely happy with how that looks. Personally, I wouldn't be happy sending this out as a print to a customer. So I am going to do this again, and we're going to see if we get a slightly better result.
What if you could get rid of long tent setup forever?
Setting up tents should be instant, easy, and stress-free.
Again, I can see that the foil has stuck to my design. So let's see if it's stuck better than the last one. Time for the foil reveal. So already I can see that has worked so much nicer. Now there are some little black specks still, and you're pretty much always going to get that with toner reactive foiling. There have been some times when I've had the perfect foil and it is dreamy. However, a lot of the time you're always going to get really tiny black specks. As you can see, this has worked out better than my previous one. This one had a lot more black specks. And I think this might have been because I'd used part of the foil that had been out for a little while, so potentially it got a little bit dusty. Also, the foil machine was on longer for this print, which just meant that it had time to heat up a little bit more. The biggest issue people have with foiling is having super patchy foiling, and that's where a lot of black is still being shown, and that is where a lot of black is still being shown and the foil isn't sticking to it all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to foil using a piece of card that still feels a bit smooth, but it's not quite right for foiling. And I'm going to show you the difference between the two. And this will show you how even simple things like the right paper is super important for foiling. So I've printed this in exactly the same way that I showed you earlier. However, this time I'm using just a normal matte white card. I think it's about 300 GSM, and to me it does feel quite smooth. I'm going to use the same foil as before and cut to a similar size, and then we're going to test it out with the Minc foil machine at exactly the same heat setting too. Okay, so I've now foiled the matte card, and I'm not sure if you can tell on camera, to be honest, but I can see that it doesn't look like the foil has stuck as well. It looks quite patchy and a bit bobbly. So let's peel it off and see what it looks like. Yeah, this has worked exactly how I wanted it to work, which is a bonus. So can you see if I shine it towards the light, there are a lot more black specks, especially over here. There is a lot of black on this Y. There's some few specks on this P. In general, it hasn't created a really smooth foil effect. And although some people may be happy with this, and I think this would look lovely in your own home, I personally wasn't happy with this when I started foiling. And this is an effect that a lot of people will probably get when they first start out, and they're figuring out what is the best method for them when they are doing tonal reactive foiling. I'll just get the other print and we can compare the two. So side by side, if I just move them around in the light, in general, they look pretty similar, but when you start looking really close up, you can see the amount of black dots really does affect how good the quality of print looks. So that's showing you how one aspect of foiling can really affect the quality of your foil prints. Other things that you can experiment with are the types of foils you're using. It might be the printer that you're using. I actually personally used to go to a local print shop and they would print my designs off for me. However, I found when I started selling on Etsy, I just found it a lot easier having my own printer. So there's lots of aspects of foiling that need to be tweaked ever so slightly to get that perfect foil effect. And this shows you how paper is super important. The other aspects of foiling that are good to consider is your design. Maybe the lines that your foil is trying to stick to is too thin, or there's too much solid black. Either one of those can really affect how the foil print works. And then if you've got a Minc foil machine, the temperature setting that you have your foil on will really affect how it works too. So as you can see, there's a lot of moving parts to creating a foil print like this. And as I said at the beginning, it does require a lot of testing and patience. I am going to leave a link to everything in the description below that I use, but I can't promise you that you will get the same results. That's including my paper, which is something I've been quite precious about for a long time, because I feel like this has been the golden ticket for making my foil prints work. Now, when I first started learning to foil, a lot of people suggested Recollections paper, which can be found in Michaels in America, and that's just not something I can access. No matter who I talk to, they always suggested that paper, but because I'm in the UK, I can't access it. It was so frustrating. So the paper that I use is actually called Craven Silk, and I discovered this just from testing so many different pieces of paper. I think I've probably spent like between 50 and £100 trying to figure out what the best paper is to use, to be honest. It's taken me a really long time, but I'm going to reveal this little secret for you guys today, and hopefully you can get similar results. My printer is quite old, so if I can't find a link to my specific printer, I'll leave a link to a newer model, but again, I can't guarantee it will work in the same way. Foiling onto coloured paper is something that I'm still trying to get the hang of, so I don't really have a recommendation for the best colour paper to use yet. Colour paper tends to have a little bit more texture to it, and because of that, it makes it a lot harder for the foil to stick really evenly. However, if you do know any colour paper that works really well for foiling, let me know in the comments below, because I really want to test it out. And please make sure it's available in the UK, because it makes me sad when it's not. Basically, that's how I make my foil prints. I really recommend you go out and you experiment with different papers and foils and see what works best for you. I really like using the Minc foils, however, I know that some people do recommend the Deco foils. Patsy May also has a really lovely variety of different foils too. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and give it some love. And if you want to see some more videos from me in the future, then hit that subscribe button below and you'll hopefully be notified of more videos from me. I hope you found this video helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye!